If entreated to take upon him any such matter, it was generally understood that he would prefer not to. In other words, that he would refuse point blank. As days went on, I became considerably reconciled to Bartleby. His steadiness, his freedom from all dissipation, his incessant industry, except when he chose to throw himself into a standing reverie behind his screen, his great stillness, his unalterableness of demeanor again, under all circumstances, made him a valuable acquisition. One prime thing was this: he was always there, first in the morning, continually through the day, and the last at night. I had a singular confidence in his honesty. I felt my most precious papers perfectly safe in his hands. Sometimes, to be sure, I could not, for the very soul of me, avoid falling into sudden spasmodic passions with him. But it was exceedingly difficult to bear in mind all the time those strange peculiarities, privileges, and unheard-of exemptions, forming the tacit stipulations on Bartleby's part under which he remained in my office. Now and then I would inadvertently summon Bartleby on a short, rapid tone to put his finger, say, on the incipient tie of a bit of red tape with which I was about compressing some papers. Of course, from behind the screen, the usual answer, "I would prefer not to," was sure to come. And then, how could a human creature with the common infirmities of our nature refrain from bitterly exclaiming upon such perverseness, with such unreasonableness? However, every added repulse of this sort which I received only tended to lessen the probability of my repeating the inadvertence. One Sunday morning I happened to go to Trinity Church to hear a celebrated preacher, and finding myself rather early on the ground, I thought I would walk around to my chambers for a while. Luckily, I had my key with me, but upon applying it to the lock, I found it resisted by something inserted from the inside. Quite surprised, I called out, when to my consternation, a key was turned from within, and thrusting his lean visage at me, and holding the door ajar, the apparition of Bartleby appeared in his shirt sleeves, and otherwise in a strangely tattered dishabille, saying quietly that he was sorry, but he was deeply engaged just then, and preferred not admitting me at present. In a brief word or two, he moreover added that perhaps I'd better walk around the block 2 or 3 times, and by that time he would probably have concluded his affairs. Now, the utterly unsurmised appearance of Bartleby, tenanting my law chambers on a Sunday morning with his cadaverously gentlemanly nonchalance, yet withal firm and self-possessed, had such a strange effect upon me that incontinently I slunk away from my own door and did as desired, but not without sudden twinges of impotent rebellion against the mild effrontery of this unaccountable scrivener. Indeed, it was his wonderful mildness chiefly which not only disarmed me, but unmanned me, as it were. For I consider that one, for the time, is a sort of unmanned when he tranquilly permits his hired clerk to dictate to him and order him away from his own premises. Furthermore, I was full of uneasiness as to what Bartleby could possibly be doing in my office in his shirt sleeves on a Sunday morning. Was anything amiss going on? Nay, that was out of the question. It was not to be thought of for a moment that Bartleby was an immoral person. But what could he be doing there? Copying? Nay, again, whatever might be his eccentricities, Bartleby was an eminently decorous person. He would be the last man to sit down to his desk in any state approaching to nudity. Besides, it was Sunday, and there was something about Bartleby that forbade the supposition that he would by any secular occupation violate the proprieties of the day. Nevertheless, my mind was not pacified, and full of a restless curiosity. When I at last returned to the door, I inserted my key, opened it, and entered. Bartleby was not to be seen. I looked around anxiously, peeped behind the screen, but it was very plain that he was gone. Upon more closely examining the place, I surmised that for an indefinite period Bartleby must have eaten, dressed, and slept in my office, and that too without plate, mirror, or bed. The cushioned seat of a rickety old sofa in one corner bore the faint impress of a lean, reclining form. Rolled away under his desk, I found a blanket. Under the empty grate, a blackening box and brush. On a chair, a tin basin with soap and a ragged towel. In a newspaper, a few crumbs of ginger nuts and a morsel of cheese. Yes, thought I, it is evident that Bartleby has been making his home here, keeping Bachelor's Hall all by himself. Immediately then the thought came sweeping across me, what miserable friendlessness and loneliness are here revealed. His poverty is great, but his solitude, how horrible. Think of it. Of a Sunday, Wall Street is deserted as Petra. And every night of every day it is an emptiness. This building, too, which of weekdays hums with industry and life, at nightfall echoes with sheer vacancy, and all through Sunday is forlorn. And here Bartleby makes his home, sole spectator of a solitude which he has seen all populous, a sort of innocent and transformed Marius, brooding among the ruins of Carthage. For the first time in my life, a feeling of overpowering, stinging melancholy seized me. Before, I had never experienced aught but a not unpleasing sadness. The bond of a common humanity now drew me irresistibly to a gloom. For both I and Bartleby were sons of Adam. I remembered the bright silks and sparkling faces I had seen that day in gala trim, swan-like sailing down the Mississippi of Broadway, and I contrasted them with the pallid copyist, and thought to myself, ah, happiness courts the light, so we deem the world is gay, but misery hides aloof, so we deem that misery there is none. These sad fancyings, chimeras doubtless of a sick and silly brain, led on to other and more special thoughts concerning the eccentricities of Bartleby. Suddenly I was attracted by Bartleby's closed desk, the key in open sight left in the lock. I mean no mischief, seeking the gratification of no heartless curiosity, thought I. Besides, the desk is mine, and its contents too, so I will make bold to look within. Everything was methodically arranged, the papers smoothly placed. The pigeonholes were deep, and removing the files of documents, I groped into their recesses. Presently I found something there, and dragged it out. It was an old bandana handkerchief, heavy and knotted. I opened it and saw that it was a savings bank. I now recalled all the quiet mysteries which I had noted in the man. I remembered that he never spoke but to answer, that though at intervals he had considerable time to himself, yet I had never seen him reading, no, not even a newspaper, that for long periods he would stand looking out of his pale window behind the screen upon the dead brick wall. I was quite sure he never visited any refectory or eating place, while his pale face clearly indicated that he never drank beer, like Turkey, or tea or coffee even, like other men, that he never went anywhere in particular that I could learn, never went out for a walk, unless indeed that was the case at present, that he had declined telling who he was, or whence he came, or whether he had any relatives in the world, that though so thin and pale, he never complained of ill health, and more than all, I remembered a certain unconscious air of pallid, how shall I call it, of pallid haughtiness, say, or rather an austere reserve about him, which had so positively awed me into my tame compliance with his eccentricities when I had feared to ask him to do the slightest incidental thing for me, even though I might know from his long-continued motionlessness that behind his screen he must be standing in one of those dead-wall reveries of his. Resolving these things and coupling them with the recently discovered fact that he made my office his constant abiding place and home, and not forgetful of his morbid moodiness, resolving all these things, a prudential feeling began to steal over me. My first emotions had been those of pure melancholy and sincerest pity, but just in proportion as the forlornness of Bartleby grew and grew in my imagination, did that same melancholy merge into fear, and pity into repulsion. So true it is, and so terrible too, that up to a certain point the thought or sight of misery enlists our best affections, but in certain cases beyond that point it does not. What I saw that morning persuaded me that the scrivener was the victim of innate and incurable disorder. I might give alms to his body, but his body did not pain him. It was his soul that suffered, and his soul I could not reach. I did not accomplish the purpose of going to Trinity Church that morning. Somehow the things I had seen disqualified me for the time from church going. I walked home finally, thinking what I would do with Bartleby. Finally I resolved upon this. I would put certain calm questions to him the next morning touching his history and so forth, and if he declined to answer them openly and unreservedly, and I supposed he would prefer not, then to give him a $20 bill over and above whatever I might owe him, and tell him his services were no longer required, but if any way I could assist him, I would be happy to do so. I would willingly help to defray the expenses of his returning to his native place, wherever that might be. Moreover, if after reaching home he found himself at any time in want of aid, a letter from him would be certain of a reply. The morning came. "Bartleby," said I, gently calling him behind his screen. No reply. "Bartleby, come here. I am not going to ask you to do anything you would prefer not to do. I simply wish to speak to you." Upon this he noiselessly slid into view. "Will you tell me, Bartleby, where you were born?" "I would prefer not to." "Will you tell me anything about yourself?" I would prefer not to. But what reasonable objection can you have to speak to me? I feel friendly toward you. He did not look at me while I spoke, but kept his glance fixed on Cicero, which, as I then sat, was directly behind me, some 6 inches above my head. "What is your answer, Bartleby?" said I, after waiting a considerable time for a reply, during which his countenance remained immovable, only there was the faintest conceivable tremor of a white, attenuated mouth. "At present, I prefer to give no answer," he said, and returned to his hermitage. It was rather weak in me, I confess, but his manner on this occasion nettled me. Not only did there seem to lurk in it a certain calm disdain, but his perverseness seemed ungrateful, considering the undeniable good uses and indulgence that he had received from me. Again I sat ruminating at what I should do, mortified as I was at his behavior, and resolved as I had been to dismiss him when I entered my office. Nevertheless, I felt something superstitious knocking at my heart, and forbidding me to carry out my purpose. "Bartleby, never mind then about revealing your history, but let me entreat you as a friend to comply, as so far as may be, with the usages of this office. Say now that you will help to examine papers tomorrow or next day. In short, say now that in a day or two you will begin to be a little reasonable. Say so, Bartleby." "At present, I would prefer not to be a little reasonable," was his mildly cadaverous reply. Just then the folding doors opened, and Nippers approached. He seemed suffering from an unusually bad night's rest, induced by severe indigestion. He overheard those final words of Bartleby. "Prefer not, eh?" gritted Nippers. "I'd prefer him if I were you, sir. I'd prefer him. I'd give him preferences, that stubborn mule. What is it, sir, that he prefers not to do now?" "Mr. Nippers," said I, "I'd prefer that you would withdraw for the present." Somehow of late I had got into the way of involuntarily using this word "prefer" on all sorts of not exactly suitable occasions, and I trembled to think that my contact with the scrivener had already and seriously affected me in a mental way. And what further and deeper aberration might not it produce yet? This apprehension had not been without efficacy in determining me to summary measures. The next day I noticed that Bartleby did nothing but stand at his window in his dead-wall reverie. Upon asking him why he did not write, he said he had decided upon doing no more writing. "Why? How now? What next? Do no more writing?" "No more." "And what is the reason?" "Do you not see the reason for yourself?" he replied. I looked steadfastly at him, perceived that his eyes looked dulled and glazed. Instantly it occurred to me that his unexampled diligence in copying by his dim window for the first few weeks of his stay with me might have temporarily impaired his vision. I was touched. I said something in condolence with him. I hinted that of course he did wisely in abstaining from writing for a while, and urged him to embrace that opportunity, taking wholesome exercise in the open air. This, however, he did not do. A few days after this, I thought that having nothing else earthly to do, Bartleby would surely be less inflexible than usual and carry some letters to the post office. But he blankly declined, so I went myself. Still added days went by. Whether Bartleby's eyes improved or not, I could not say. To all appearance, I thought they did, but when I asked him if they did, he didn't answer. At all events, he would do no copying. At last he informed me that he had permanently given up copying. "What? Suppose your eyes should get entirely well, better than ever before. Would you not copy then?" "I have given up copying," he answered, and slid aside. What was to be done? He would do nothing in the office. Why should he stay there? In plain fact, he had now become a millstone to me, not only useless as a necklace, but afflictive to bear. Yet I was sorry for him. I speak less than truth when I say that on his own account he occasioned me uneasiness. If he would but have named a single relative or friend, I would instantly have written and urged their taking the poor fellow away to some convenient retreat. But he seemed alone, absolutely alone in the universe. At length, necessities connected with my business tyrannized over all other considerations. Decently as I could, I told Bartleby that in 6 days' time he must unconditionally leave the office. I warned him to take measures in the interval for procuring some other abode. I offered to assist him. "And when you finally quit me, Bartleby, I shall see that you do not go entirely unprovided. 6 days from this hour, remember." At the expiration of that period, I peeped behind the screen. Bartleby was still there. I buttoned up my coat, balanced myself, advanced slowly toward him, touched his shoulder, and said, "The time has come. You must quit this place. I am sorry for you. Here is money, but you must go." "I would prefer not." "You must." He remained silent. "Bartleby," I said, "I owe you $12 on account. Here are 32. The odd 20 are yours. Will you take it?" He made no motion. "I will leave them here then," putting them under the weight on the table. Then taking my hat and cane and going to the door, I tranquilly turned and added, "After you have removed your things from these offices, Bartleby, you will of course lock the door, since everyone is now gone for the day but you. And if you please, slip your key under the mat so that I may have it in the morning. I shall not see you again, so goodbye to you. If hereafter in your new place of abode I can be of any service to you, do not fail to advise me by letter. Goodbye, Bartleby, and farewell." He answered not a word. As I walked home, my vanity got the better of my pity. I could not but highly plume myself on my masterly management in getting rid of Bartleby. Masterly I call it, as such it must appear to a dispassionate thinker. The beauty of my procedure seemed to consist in its perfect quietness. There was no vulgar bullying, no bravado of any sort, no choleric hectoring, and striding to and fro across the apartment, jerking out vehement commands for Bartleby to bundle himself off with his beggarly traps. Nothing of the kind. Without loudly bidding Bartleby depart, as an inferior genius might have done, I assumed the ground that depart he must, and upon that assumption built all I had to say. The more I thought over my procedure, the more I was charmed with it. Nevertheless, next morning, upon awakening, I had my doubts. I had somehow slept off the fumes of vanity. One of the coolest and wisest hours a man has is just after he wakes in the morning. My procedure seemed as sagacious as ever, but only in theory. How it would prove in practice, that was the rub. As I intended, I was earlier than usual at my office door. I stood listening for a moment. All was still. He must be gone. I tried the knob. The door was locked. Yes, my procedure had worked to a charm. He must indeed have vanished. I was almost sorry for my brilliant success. I was fumbling under the doormat for the key, which Bartleby was to have left there for me, when accidentally my knee knocked against a panel, producing a summoning sound, and in response a voice came to me from within. "Not yet. I am occupied." It was Bartleby. I was thunderstruck. For an instant I stood like the man who, pipe in mouth, was killed one cloudless afternoon not long ago in Virginia by summer lightning. At his own warm, open window he was killed, and remained leaning out there upon the dreamy afternoon till someone touched him when he fell. "Bartleby," I said, entering the office with a quietly severe expression, "I am seriously displeased. I am pained, Bartleby. I had thought better of you. I had imagined you of such a gentlemanly organization that in any delicate dilemma a slight hint would suffice, in short, an assumption, but it appears I am deceived. Why have you have not even touched the money yet?" He answered nothing. "Will you or will you not quit me?" "I would prefer not to quit you." "What earthly right have you to stay here? Do you pay any rent? Do you pay any taxes? Or is this property yours?" He answered nothing. "Are you ready to go on and write now? Are your eyes recovered? Could you copy a small paper for me this morning, or help examine a few lines, or step round to the post office? In a word, will you do anything at all to give a coloring to your refusal to depart?" He silently returned into his hermitage. Men have committed murder for jealousy's sake, and anger's sake, and hatred's sake, and selfishness' sake, and spiritual pride's sake. But no man that I ever heard of ever committed a diabolical murder for sweet charity's sake. Mere self-interest, then, if no better motive could be enlisted, should, especially with high-tempered men, prompt all beings to charity and philanthropy. At any rate, upon the occasion in question, I strove to drown my exasperated feelings toward the scrivener by benevolently construing his conduct. Poor fellow, thought I. He don't mean anything. And besides, he has seen hard times and ought to be indulged. I endeavored immediately to occupy myself and at the same time to comfort my despondency. I tried to fancy that in the course of the morning, at such time as might prove agreeable to him, Bartleby of his own free accord would emerge, take up some line of march in direction of the door. But no, the day wore on, and he did not come out. I would have just let him stay. If it had not been for the remarks and unsolicited remarks given by my professional friends who would come in. Sometimes an attorney, having business with me and calling in my office, finding no one but the scrivener there, would try to find out some information from him. Bartleby would remain standing immovable in the middle of the room. So, after contemplating him in that position for a time, the attorney would depart. The lawyer would give me a great stare. At last I was made aware that through the circle of my professional acquaintances a whisper of wonder was running around, having reference to the strange creature I kept at my office. This worried me very much. I resolved to gather my faculties together and forever rid me of this intolerable incubus. What shall I do? I said to myself. What shall I do? What ought I to do? What does conscience say I should do with this man, or rather ghost? Rid myself of him I must. Go he shall, but how? You shall not thrust him, the pale, poor, passive mortal. You will not thrust such a helpless creature out of your door. You will not dishonor yourself by such cruelty. No, I will not, I cannot do that. Rather would I let him live and die there, and mason up his remains in the wall. What then could you do? For all your coaxing, he will not budge. Bribes he leaves under your own paperweight on your table. In short, it is quite plain that he prefers to cling to you. I decided I would move. The story goes on to tell that he takes quarters somewhere else and moves out. But Bartleby does not move. Bartleby continues to use the premises. And, of course, the landlord then gets after the head lawyer to do something about this. So finally, I approached him again. Bartleby, will you go home with me, not to my office, but to my dwelling, and remain there till we can conclude upon some convenient arrangement for you at our leisure? Come on, let's start right away. No, at present I would prefer not to make any change at all. Being under no disgraceful charge and quite serene and harmless in all his ways. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. I was informed that Bartleby had been removed to the Tombs as a vagrant. Moreover, since I knew more about him than anyone else, they wished me to appear at that place and make a suitable statement of the facts. As I afterward learned, the poor scrivener, when told that he must be conducted to the Tombs, offered not the slightest obstacle, but in his pale, unmoving way silently acquiesced. The same day I received the note, I went to the Tombs to speak more properly the halls of justice. Seeking the right officer, I stated the purpose of my call, and was informed that the individual I described was indeed within. I then begged to have an interview. I found him standing all alone in the quietest of the yards, his face toward a high wall, while all around from the narrow slits of the jail walls I thought I saw peering out upon him the eyes of murderers and thieves. Bartleby, I know you, he said, without looking around, and I want nothing to say to you. It was not I that brought you here, Bartleby, and to you this should not be so vile a place. Nothing reproachful attaches to you by being here, and see, it is not so sad a place as one might think. Look, there is the sky, and here is the grass. I know where I am, he replied, but would say nothing more, and so I left him. He's odd, ain't he? Said the grub man as I left. I think he is a little deranged, I said sadly. Deranged? Deranged, is it? Well, now, upon my word, I thought that friend of yourn was a gentleman forger. They are always pale and genteel like them forgers. I can't help pity 'em, sir. Do you know Monroe Edwards? He died of consumption at Sing Sing. So you weren't acquainted with Monroe? Are you looking for the silent man? Said another turnkey passing me. Yonder he lies, sleeping in the yard there. 'Tis not 20 minutes since I saw him lie down. The yard was entirely quiet. It was not accessible to the common prisoners. The surrounding walls of amazing thickness kept all sound behind them. Strangely huddled at the base of the wall, his knees drawn up and lying on his side, his head touching the cold stones, I saw the wasted Bartleby. But nothing stirred. I paused, then went up close to him, stooped over, and saw that his dim eyes were open. Otherwise, he seemed profoundly sleeping. Something prompted me to touch him. I felt his hand when a tingling shiver ran up my arm and down my spine to my feet. "Won't he dine today either, or does he live without dining?" said the grub man. "Lives without dining," said I, and closed the eyes. "Ah, he's asleep, ain't he?" "With kings and counselors," murmured I. There would seem little need for proceeding further in this story. Imagination will readily supply the meager recital of poor Bartleby's interment. But before parting the reader, let me say that if this little narrative has sufficiently interested him to arouse curiosity as to who Bartleby was, I can only reply that in curiosity I fully share. I am unable to gratify it. But inasmuch as this vague report was given to me, I'll pass it on. Bartleby had been a subordinate clerk in the dead letter office at Washington, from which he was suddenly removed by a change in the administration. When I think over this rumor, hardly can I express the emotions which seize me. Dead letters, does it not sound like dead men? Conceive a man by nature and misfortune prone to a pallid hopelessness. Can any business seem more fitted to heighten it than that of continually handling dead letters and assorting them for the flames? For by the cartload they are annually burned. Sometimes from out the folded paper the pale clerk takes a ring. The finger it was meant for perhaps moulders in the grave. A banknote sent in swiftest charity. He whom it would relieve nor eats nor hungers any more. Pardon for those who died despairing. Hope for those who died unhoping. Good tidings for those who died stifled by unrelieved calamities. On errands of life those letters sped to death. Ah, Bartleby! Ah, humanity!